will follow.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I'm Ken Coughlan, and today I have two lovely guests who have agreed to join me. Seated to my left is Jessica McAllister. Jess is from Westchester, Pennsylvania. She earned her undergraduate degree in music education from James Madison University, and then went on to receive her master's degree in music therapy from Colorado State. In 2009, she began her private practice, Cornerstone Music Therapy Services, where she contracted with various organizations and individuals to provide music therapy services to a variety of populations. She currently works as a music therapist at Broadmead Retirement Community in Cockeysville, Maryland, where she works primarily with older adults suffering from various stages of dementia. She's also the current music teacher for the lower school at Trinity Lutheran School. She and her husband Ryan have two children, John, who's 2.5, and Amelia, who's 4 months old. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And seated to my right, speak of the devil, is Ryan McAllister.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything that I said about her and the kids applies to him. So just transfer that over to this side of the table. Ryan is the Director of Contemporary and Youth Music here at Trinity, and he has currently worked in both the Presbyterian Church and the Church of the Brethren denominations. Thank you for coming again, Ryan.
Thanks, Ken.
Ryan was here on our very first episode, and we've expanded quite a bit since then. It's a little more intimidating now to be
That's
on
right.
set of things.
A lot more going on. Right?
Round two.
So, hey, before we jump into our current events segment, I do have a couple quick things I want to share. First of all, those of you that receive the church's newsletter, also called Trinity Talk, may come across an article that listed what the shows were going to be for the month of August, and it did say that today's episode was supposed to be on how do I find where I should be serving. Now, due to some scheduling issues, we did have to bump that one. Now, we're still going to have that show, but it's going to be coming up at the end of the month, end of August instead. Instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be starting a 4-week series on families and back to school. Now, I don't want to scare anybody. I know it's that time of year where it gets a lot of anxiety gets up. Either you've got kids or you work in a school and you realize, oh my gosh, the summer really is almost over. It's coming. It's sneaking up on us. So what we thought we'd do is spend about 4 weeks helping people get ready for that. Starting with today's episode, obviously, about balancing work and family. And then over the course of the next 3 weeks, we're going to have episodes on what it is like to be a Christian in college. That's next week. What it is like to be a Christian in high school. And then we're going to close out this series with a special episode on what we can do about cyberbullying. So please, please, please make sure you don't miss an episode. Come and watch all those. And go ahead and share our channel with other people. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that could benefit from this series that we're going to be doing. So tell your friends about us. Both they can check out some past episodes and check out what we've got coming up. So, with all that said, let's move into our current event segment, all right?
Okay.
All right, so our first story today is about actor Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was invited to speak to a group of former gang members and prisoners at Homeboy Industries, a rehabilitation center in Los Angeles. And he was speaking about 2 different ways people can respond to the suffering that they experience in life. And I want to read a portion of what he said here. He says, ultimately, I believe that suffering leads to salvation. In fact, it's the only way that we have to somehow accept, not deny, but feel our suffering and feel our losses. And then we make one of 2 decisions. We either decide to go through the gate of resentment, which leads to vengeance, which leads to self-harm, which leads to harm to others, or we go through the gate of forgiveness, which leads to grace. And again, speaking to the people here at this rehabilitation center, he said, your being here is an indication that you've made the decision to walk through the gate of forgiveness to grace, just as Christ did on the cross. He suffered terribly, and he was broken by it, to the point of doubt and a feeling of absolute abandonment, which all of you have felt. Then there was a decision to be made. And the decision was to look upon the people who were causing that suffering with compassion and with forgiveness. And that's what opens the gates of heaven for all of us. I wish that for all of you. I wish that for myself. So the second story is kind of somewhat, I don't want to say related, but it was along the same tone, I guess, that came across this week. And it was from CBN News, is reporting how Kelsey Grammer is giving Jesus credit for helping him to overcome his substance abuse. Grammer has lived a very hard life. When he was 13 years old, his father was killed in a home invasion. Then in 1975, his younger sister was raped and murdered. After that, he had 2 half-brothers, both of whom died in a freak scuba diving accident in the Virgin Islands. After all of this, needless to say, he fell into full-fledged drug and alcohol addiction until he actually wound up in prison on a DUI conviction. But he gave his life to Christ, and he went into rehab. And the 62-year-old actor now says that it's all thanks to Jesus, and he wants to become more like Jesus every day. And here's the quote I want to share that I really, really like, that stuck out to me. He said, "As a Christian, we always fail because we can't become Christ. But I can try to at least emulate the best qualities, even if I may fall short." And the third story is from Dr. James McGrath. He's a professor of New Testament at Butler University, and he has come up with what might be described as a very unique way of teaching his students about how the New Testament canon came to be. Here's what he had to say about why he went about doing this. His students regularly come to class with misconceptions about the biblical canon. Some think the whole thing dropped from the sky as a complete package, while others have heard the Da Vinci Code version that has Constantine telling the church that it has too many gospels and they need to cut the list down to 4. The actual history of the canon is a complex one, which started with works that a network of communities happened to have and share, and then met with debates among themselves, as well as between themselves and others about works that they did not all share. So McGrath's solution to this problem was he came up with a card game, which is called Canon, that makes learning about the Bible's origins fun and educational. Now we're going to share a link in the show notes for this program to a YouTube video that explains exactly how the game works. But my wife picked this story. She picked out all these stories, actually. I got to give her credit for that. But I guarantee this is why she picked this story out, because she saw this last part. And what McGrath did, he's also came up with some other interesting ways of using items from pop culture to help illustrate biblical themes. And here's what he said. He said, "When all fans agree that the first Star Wars movie ever made is at the heart of the canon, and yet disagree about whether Han shot first, that is essentially a matter of textual criticism, akin to accepting the Gospel of John and yet debating the status of the story of the woman caught in adultery." I agree, and it's funny, you see that, and I see the parallel completely. So let me start over here with Jess and ask you, out of those 3 stories, what stood out to you?
Well, there are 3 great stories, and one of the things that popped out to me in that first story about Jim Carrey and him talking about suffering is something that I actually this summer really have felt like God's been molding me and understanding the concept of suffering. And I think for a long time, I kind of considered suffering as something that happened because of a mistake that I made or some way that I've fallen short, or in the world, just very confused about why suffering happens and what that purpose is. And over the last couple months, I've really been shown, really through the Holy Spirit, that suffering in and of itself is not a bad thing. And it's through that suffering that we can see the Lord in a beautiful way. In the Gospel of John, Jesus is very clear, in this world you will have trouble. But he says, take heart, I've overcome the world. So there's peace there, and there is hope in that suffering. And through that, God just wants us to trust him no matter what. He's asking us to have a childlike faith through the good and the hard. And I just think he says it in such a great way. You have a choice to make when you experience suffering. How are you going to look at it? And we have Jesus' teachings to help us to have a direction in how we're going to look at that and what choice we're going to make. And in that faith and in that trust in the hardest times is where we can find the Lord in the most intimate ways. So that has been, something that I've been learning. And when you have that change in perspective, not saying that suffering is not a tough thing to go through. There are so many things in this world that are just so, you can't help but ask yourself, why is this happening? Why is this happening to the world, these groups of people? Why is this happening to my friend? Why is this happening to me? And it does seem like there's something wrong in that picture, but that we have that hope that Jesus has come. He's overcome the world, and to have that intimacy with the Lord through that trusting in that hard time.
Yeah, it's funny because I was literally just having an online conversation, just this morning with somebody who had posted something online about all the suffering in the world, and some people use that as kind of a reason to deny God. And I think one of the answers to that, and C.S. Lewis mentioned this as well, is that there's learning to be done and growth that can be done through suffering that maybe we wouldn't otherwise be able to experience.
Absolutely.
So I think it's an eye-opening. What about you, Ryan? What stood out to you?
Yeah, well, paired with that, you said the second story is connected in some ways with Kelsey Grammer, and I think along that, you just mentioned a childlike faith, and you're talking about suffering. One thing that's just kind of caught my attention, and we've been talking about at home, was how God can also help us unlearn behaviors and help us through suffering and through difficult situations kind of return us to that childlike faith by stripping things down and taking things away. I mean, I think about, Kelsey Grammer, all that he has had to go through and probably bad habits that he's formed with drug addiction and other things, how God has stripped those things away, that it sounds like, to have the realization he can't become Christ. It just sounds like he's simplifying things. Instead of trying to chase after, things that he can't attain, to take a step back to say, okay, God, what are you teaching me, or what are you helping me to unlearn, to let go of? I think that's applicable in both of those first two stories. And then I think in the third, I think it's I don't know, in ministry I try to think of things in the context of, is this relevant?
Mm-hmm.
How do we make this relevant? How do we speak to millennials? How do we speak to every, different demographic and every different generation? And, meeting people where they are is really important. And I think it's great that, a teacher, not just, someone who's there because he teaches New Testament. You know what I mean? How can we make sure that everything is relevant without watering anything down?
Mm-hmm.
Just so that there's a jumping off point to say, I'm meeting you where you are. I hear what you're saying. I see you. Now let's walk together forward.
Yeah, I do quite often. Well, as you can probably hear, Millie's here with us today, so it's going to be a distraction because she's so adorable, right? So if you ever see me looking down here, that's why. Okay, lots of times I find I do talk to people about textual criticism, and people just don't have a good understanding of what that is and how the Bible came to be. And I think that, hey, this is an example of something, hey, I might use this in the future as a way of kind of communicating concepts to people that might be foreign to them, but using something that they're familiar with. It can be very, very helpful. So, all right, excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, we are going to launch now then into our topic of the week. Our topic for the week is properly prioritizing work and family. And I want to start out today with some scriptures. I've got several here. I'll just pick out a few. For example, if we look at Proverbs 14:23, it says that all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. Proverbs 6:10-11 says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. 1 Timothy 5:8, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And so we do see a series of scriptures in here that tell us to work hard and work diligently. But at the same time, you see a number of scriptures like Psalm 127, verse 3. Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring and a reward from him. Psalm 128, 3 and 4. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Yes, this will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. So what we see is we have certain scriptures that talk about working hard and working diligently and not being lazy and not slacking off. But then at the same time, we have scriptures that say, to prioritize your family. Your family is a blessing, and this should be something that's very important to you. And I just wanted to read a quote I found from an online blog called The High Calling. And what it said is this, is the Bible doesn't make a dichotomy between work and life, because in the ancient world, work life and family life were often integrated. Families worked together in their family trade, whether in agriculture or commerce. So in biblical times, maybe there wasn't as much of a struggle, for some people anyway, between work and family, because the two were often intertwined. But we don't live in that culture anymore. So I guess my first question, let me start with Jess, is first of all, is this struggle real in today's culture?
The struggle is real. I think so. I think I was thinking about our family and the different stages that we've gone through. When Ryan and I first got married and we were starting our life, our family was the two of us, and so that was a stage where we needed to balance that. We were both working full time, and then later on, I was in graduate school, and you can always have something to do when you're in graduate school. So we had to find, a way to juggle and balance that work and family, the two of us. And then we had our son, John. So that kind of changed our family, obviously, to 3, and what that meant to juggle work and family. And then recently we've had Amelia, or Millie we call her, and so that's been a new chapter of juggling work and family and finding that balance. And so I think from my perspective, at least as a working mommy, it's been a process that has grown and changed over the last several years. Ryan and I will be married 10 years next year, and so reflecting on that past 10 years, it really has morphed and changed. And it's a rough and tough and at times confusing road to travel, and figuring out, Lord, where do you have us? Where do you have me? Where do you have our time that is going to be most glorifying to you? Our purpose in life is to glorify the Lord, enjoy Him forever. So what does that mean for us in our life as it's changed? And so, and from my perspective, it's been a process of me really needing to go to the Lord in prayer and some earnest questions of where should my time be spent, and what proportion of my time should be spent working out of the home, in the home, how much time should be spent dedicated to whatever priorities we set to be more important. And having our children be that most important priority, and going from there. So, finding peace and rest in those hard decisions for me has really come from first meeting the Lord in prayer and really asking Him, where do you have us? I was blessed and really feel gifted in the fact that I was fortunate enough to be able to attend graduate school, to be able to have the skills and expertise that I have, but what does that mean now? Now that we have 2 children that are incredibly important, and wanting to spend time with them. So I think starting there with the Lord has really brought a lot of peace in the situation. And even on those days where it's really hard and I really feel like I want to cut myself into 2 pieces and be in 2 places at once, or be in 3 places at once, and it's just not possible. God only gives us 24 hours in a day. How are we going to spend that the best that we can? So for me, it's been a process of choosing, Ryan and I making the decision for me to work less than I did before. I don't work a full-time, capacity load of 40 hours a week right now. And as our children have come into play, we've made that decision bit by bit. I pulled back a little bit, when John was born, and pulled back even more now that we have 2. And there I really felt like that's what God was calling us to do, for me to be at home a bit more. But at the same time, I really do feel called to use the gifts and talents that I have, and the knowledge and expertise to do His work outside the home. And for me, that has been really where I feel the Lord pulling me and guiding me and asking of me. And I have moments in those times where it's absolutely completely apparent that I am exactly where I should be in that moment, and so being able to spend that time outside of the home, feeling like I am contributing in that way, has been something that I really do feel is important. So it's been. All of that being said, has been a process for us, and making those changes as we feel led and as we feel like the Lord is really guiding us in the direction that we should go.
Let me ask you a question about that, because there could be people watching this that are having kind of the same thought process. I actually went through something very similar to you, where you said when the kids were born, that you started making a decision that, okay, maybe I still want to use my talents for the Lord. I still want to contribute, but I also want to pull back, so I'm spending some more time with family. I recently went through a very similar situation where, for those of you that don't know, I was working full-time as an attorney and decided, I was starting to realize that I wasn't, especially I had a long commute and all that, and I was traveling a lot. I wasn't spending the time with my family that I really wanted to, and so we kind of made a decision where I went part-time, and now I work for the church part-time, and it's opened up a lot more doors for me personally if I'm getting to spend more time with them. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at you're talking to somebody out there who is thinking, hey, hadn't thought of that before, so maybe I could, pull back a little bit. How did you come to the decision about how much to pull back and how much time to dedicate to one thing as opposed to the other?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think that circumstantially that was more clear than maybe I had any right for it to be clear. The job that I was in when I first had John was a full-time, it was almost a 24-hour-a-day, 7 days, like kind of always on call kind of situation. And once I had him, that became very clear that it just wasn't something that I could do. I felt overwhelmed and stressed and felt like I wasn't doing either job as a mom or as a professional person well. And so in that circumstance, I said, this requires a change of job, and in that circumstance. And the Lord was working in that, and I look back and it was just incredibly wonderful, because that was when Trinity was looking for a music teacher. So the circumstances really worked, and so that step was made pretty clear. Mm-hmm. And then since then, having Millie, it's been something of looking at the situation, looking at the responsibilities that I have, and saying to myself, where can these changes be made? Prior to this school year, I was working at Trinity in both the middle school and the lower school, and so looking at the task there at the school and saying to myself, that's one way that we can make a change, is that rather than doing both schools, I can do one school. There she is, making herself known.
She has something to contribute.
She does. And the leadership of the school has been incredibly wonderful in hearing, that desire and working with us. And so those were kind of two different examples of a pretty significant change, a change of job, but then also a change within the job that I was at. And then at my work at Broadmead Retirement Community, I was working a certain amount of hours there, and I'm cut back those hours. So that's another example of just changing the job a little bit while maintaining being able to work there.
So it doesn't necessarily need to be an all or nothing kind of proposition.
Exactly.
Sometimes there's a balance in between that you can find.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Ryan, let me ask you a question. You were on the first episode, and the topic then was how busy is too busy. And I know when I pitched you coming on today, what I kind of told you, I says, well, we're building on that, because that was a very general type episode, but I want to kind of focus in and narrow in more on the family. And one of the things you said in that episode, and this isn't in the show notes, for those of you that are watching, I actually send out show notes ahead of time to let them know what the talking points are, kind of give a general idea. I'm completely blindsiding him right now.
Okay, right. So, here we go.
All right, he's preparing himself.
One of the things you mentioned in that episode was that multitasking is not a must. Is that the idea, the feeling that you have to always have 5 different balls in the air is not a must. And actually, we got some comments on one of our social media accounts about that. Somebody really spoke to them. And so I kind of want to take this opportunity to ask you to flesh that out a little bit more in the context of family. Because let's face it, when you're talking about family and kids, you say that kind of thing to most parents, they're going to think multitasking is, I wake up at 8 o'clock, I'm multitasking by 8:05. So how do you try to balance out that staying focused like that in a family situation?
Yes. Well, to be fair to all, the parents out there, first of all, we don't have this all figured out. We're working on it day by day. So we're not here because we are the experts that have all
the experts down here.
Who runs the show, right? Okay, so with families, I think we talked about boundaries, that first that first first podcast. And I think they're so important. You just touched a little bit on how in the past things aren't as integrated as maybe work and family used to be. And, I think, one, that we can change that to some degree. I mean, I was really hesitant to bring my 2.5-year-old into church when I was warming up or when we were having a rehearsal. And you know what? I started to do it, and he loves it. He loves music. Those who are involved in the ministry love him. Like, God has been really good with, just making that mentality of it takes a village, it takes a church. It's very real. Don't be afraid to, include your children in what you do when appropriate. I know all jobs that's not appropriate, and they may be more difficult. But if it is, I think it's a good way for them to see what you do, to love what you do, and for you to be able to spend some time. Shifting gears a little bit with that, we talked about in the first episode with boundaries, setting time apart from work, from the kids, that's just for my wife and I, just for Jess and I. We have that at night, and we keep changing that, and one of the new things is we're not going to talk about work after a certain time. That means we don't talk about people at work, things that are upcoming. We talk about that before 8:30, and after that we have a Bible study.
So I shouldn't text you after 8:30.
So don't. I may not return your text, right? Unless it's an emergency. But to have realistic boundaries, to have time. I think it can be really easy with your spouse to multitask or divide and conquer. We call it that a lot of the time, to where there's always something to do. And it's good to maybe I'll take one of the kids, Jess will take one of the others, and we'll get things done. But there's also times where, Jess, do you need some time for yourself today? Do you need a couple hours? And it might be a little harder for me, or vice versa, it might be a little harder for her, but that's important so that we can have a fresh mind. And, I think one of the biggest things that we do, and this is one of the points that you had in the notes, was to have a day or a couple days, a weekend if you can, where work is not involved. For us, we try to make that Fridays. I'm off on Friday. Jess generally is off on Friday because I have to be here. We have a Saturday and 2 Sunday services, so I'm here all weekend. So Friday, we try to make it a day where we're together. As much as possible, we try not to do work around the house. That can be difficult. But sometimes active rest and working is fun. But to try not just to make it a day where we're just doing things to catch up, to make it a day where we are able to be with family, it's able to be away from work, and even if it's just simple, and we're going to go for a walk today, we're going to go to the park, it's going to be really simple. It's not going to be, we're going to the zoo, and we're going to meet friends there, and then we're having dinner after that. You don't need to pack it full. Be realistic, I think, is really, really important. And having that day on Friday, knowing that we get there, is really important.
We've lovingly called it Friday Family Fun Day.
Yeah.
all the alliteration is fun for us.
Makes it easy to remember,
yes.
right?
Yeah. Family Fun Day.
I think it's really, really important. I mean, because so much, it's so easy to get caught up in your work. And I think this is true. I mean, you may love your job, you may hate your job, but it's still very easy to get caught up in it to the point where, you don't even realize what time it is or how much you've been putting into it, or, what you're taking home, and taking time away from your family. And so, yeah, we've been trying to do the same thing where we, try to, make a commitment and, schedule time. And so okay, here's when it's going to be. So we make sure that even if I've got like my wife and I are working on a project this weekend where we're building a set piece basically for a local vacation Bible school, and it's a huge project, huge undertaking. But it's kind of like I was working on it, my wife was working on it, my daughter was working on it, my son, who's 10 years old, he's not pulling out the power tools, so I mean, it's just, he wasn't really able to help a whole lot.
Yeah.
But we kind of said, okay, but we didn't want to get caught in a situation where the three of us were all doing something and he was just being left out all day. So we had to make sure we made a commitment that, no, we need to get this done, yes, but we also need to prioritize family time. So we need to make sure that we have some time. And so we came in several times during the day, and we had some family time together. We watched he loves Idiot Test on the Game Show Network. And so we put that on for him because it's kind of a fun thing to do. So anyway.
Well, Ken,
yeah.
I was going to, just one more thing with that. And again, we don't have this all figured out. And if you would have asked me when I was coming out of college, would I be an organized person? I'd probably have said, I'm not so sure, but it really helps to be organized. I mean, not just planning your time, but being organized. This is what our week is going to look like, taking a little bit of time just to kind of lay things out. And there may be a lot of parents listening who say either we're very organized and we still don't have time, or you know what, maybe we could be more organized. And this isn't about parent shaming or saying that you have to be one way. It's just if you're intentional about your time and about your week, and things should get easier. And part of that being organized is spending time in prayer, spending time in the Word. As a husband and wife, that really sets the tone. Now, we can't do it at the beginning of the day. Just the way that our schedule goes, we'd like to, but it just doesn't work. We have to do it at the end of the day. But as I said in the first podcast, God meets us there every time, and that carries over into the next morning when we're able to go to bed saying, we just had a great discussion, and we just had a great connection. God met us there. Go to sleep in a good place, which is hard as a parent because that alarm clock of your 4-month-old is going to wake up at some time during the night or 6:45 in the morning or whatever it is. It's really important. So I just wanted to say that. I think that's hopefully encouraging to people. Even if you're tired at the end of the night, if you can get into that rhythm and routine, I think God will really bless you in that way.
And being realistic about that time also. I mean, that time for us can be as small as 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, it's some days that's all that we have, or that's all the energy that we have, and that God meets us there. And we have never had a night where, even if it's a 5-minute discussion, where we haven't walked away feeling changed. And so some nights we are blessed with more and more energy, and we can have more time, but it's being realistic with yourself. And instead of saying we're too tired to do it, to spend any time in the Word, today it's been one heck of a day, that we can say we're not going to skip tonight, but we're going to spend 5 minutes.
Yeah, and I think something else like you were mentioning earlier is that
Millie.
Hello,
She's
Millie.
saying hi.
Hi, Millie. Something else is sometimes, and I don't think people really think this through, sometimes you can integrate your family more into whatever your work may be. I mean, you're right, it's not always going to be appropriate, but sometimes you can take a look at it and, express an interest in what your spouse is doing, and I think you can trade off with that. I mean, case in point, we were building this VBS stuff for something my wife wanted to do, and we spent a lot of time doing that, and at the end of the day, this was on Saturday, and normally I do my show notes on Saturday morning and try to get an email out. Well, you guys, I don't know if you checked the timestamp on your email that you got. It wasn't early Saturday morning. I guess technically you could describe it as early Sunday morning.
There you go, AM.
But that's because we've been working all day. And so what happened is, my wife then, as I'm working on some of the show notes, she was actually looking up the current events and some of the other things. And so she took an interest. My daughter was here helping me set up everything today. And so there's sometimes that if you try to show an interest in what interests your family members, that sometimes you can be, actually helping them get done what they need to get done and also be spending time together at the same time.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so that's great. Any final thoughts you want to share with us, Ryan?
Just be encouraged, especially those with kids out there. We like to think of it as seasons of life that God gives us, and we had a season of just being married, being together. Now we're in the season of little kids, as you hear, and seasons come. Try to appreciate them for what they are, God's always teaching us something in the midst of every season, whether it be hard or whether it be really fun and easy. So don't be discouraged. God will meet you in every season.
Excellent. Jess, any final closing thoughts?
I just say, we've had some wonderful people that have been, giving us guidance and wisdom in this, people that are a little bit older than us that have been through it, and that's been a big deal and help. And, one thing that somebody said to me that really stuck with me in terms of being a working parent, being a working mom is, if you are doing something that you feel like God is calling you to, that if you're away from your kids, God will fill in the gaps, and that He will give you, a person to fill in the gaps. Like Ryan mentioned, it takes a village, being part of a community, and we've seen that already with our kids, and how many people love them, how they love others, and and that, God is good, and He is steadfast, and He's faithful. And so, anytime, because, you can struggle so much being away of guilt. I'm away, I shouldn't be, but that beautiful things can come from a community, and we've seen that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Millie.
Hey, thank you all for tuning in. I'm going to thank my guests here. I'm going to thank Jessica McAllister, Ryan McAllister, and of course Millie. And if you did like this video, do me a favor. If you could, please click the like button. That's a thumbs up button here on the YouTube channel. Also, comment on it. The more likes and comments that it gets, Millie wants to comment on it.
Millie would like it.
The more likes and comments that it gets, the more it gets shared and gets offered up to other people. So the more people that actually can watch this video and get to know that it's even out there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can keep up to date on everything we have that we're offering. Also, Trinity Talk Live does now have its own Facebook page. Please check it out at Trinity Talk Live Podcast on Facebook. It's a great way for you to communicate back with us. You can comment. We always put a post up for every single new episode. You can comment on that with any questions you may have, or if you have any ideas for new episodes, new topics that you would like to see covered, you can use that to let us know. We're going to be back again next Tuesday at noon. Next week's topic, as I said before, is what is it like to be a Christian in college? So, again, tell everybody about it. And thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. God bless.
In your word we will follow.